we need. Go to Nehemiah chapter 2. We're in a new series called Turning Problems into Possibilities, and last week we studied Nehemiah chapter 1 primarily and talked about the similarity between the stories in the Old Testament and the truths in the Old Testament in our lives today. The idea here is that God used the Old Testament for illustrations for biblical truth, for New Testament truth. The Bible says these things were written aforetime that for your admonition and instruction. That's to tell you no when you need to be told no, and yes when you need to be told yes. And last week we studied how to turning your problems into possibility by identifying the things that are going on in your life that are problems. We talked about in Nehemiah 1 and 2 about visualizing, about seeing things anew and afresh that aren't right, that need to be dealt with. We talked about the fallen walls of Nehemiah's days, which were literal walls and national security walls, but in our days they could be walls of national security, domestic tranquility, common decency, sound doctrine. To get dynamic, you have to be specific, so God needs to give you a vision for your family, for your home, for your church, for your marriage, for your life. Number two, not only visualization, but agonizing. Agonizo, is a deep emotional concern, usually a worry about somebody's life, about your home, again, about your school, about your job, about your Sunday school, about your ministry, whatever you're doing. The only real religion is heart religion, and nobody cares how much you know unless they know how much you care. They really are not impressed by our scholarship. We're not that high on the ladder. And if we have problems, number one, visualize them, that is, name them. And number two, agonize, that is, nail them. That qualifies for a prayer of contrition because your heart's broken about something. A prayer of confession, confidence, commitment. My father and my sister are lost. I know just about my spiritual temperature by how much I pray for them or how much I just go about my daily business and throw in and save them too, Lord, at the end. Number one, visualization. Last week we saw that. Number two, agonizing. Number three, organizing. Well, your heart's broken, but you need to do something. I've tried all sorts of strategies to reach my family in different ways, and God may be using them. I don't know. It's very hard to talk to people that are lost and get an idea of where they are, but that's the idea, is that you go ahead and organize and put a plan in shape. Today we're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 2. Let's begin reading in verse 11 through 20. So, says Nehemiah, I came to Jerusalem, and was there 3 days. And I arose in the night, I and some few men with me, neither told I any man what my God had put into my heart to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any beast with me, save the beast that I rode upon. And I went out by night by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, and to the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof, which were consumed with fire. Then I went on to the gate of the fountain and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. It was that crammed up with debris. Then went I up in the night by the brook and viewed the wall, and turned back and entered by the gate of the valley, and so returned. And the rulers knew not whither I went or what I did, neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that was of the work. He's pretty well convinced me this is between him and God. He is out by night, alone, looking through the blasted walls of a ruined and razed city, and he hasn't even told anybody. It is between him and the Lord. Look in verse 17. Then said I unto them, Ye see the distress that we're in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. Then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me, as also the king's word that he had spoken unto me. And they said, Let us arise and build, so strengthen their hands for this good work. We'll stop there for now. God's people, after they visualize, after they agonize, after they organize, are to arise and build. We're not just to take in Bible truth and sit soak and sour on the front row and try to fool everybody. God's people are to arise up and build. And the principles we're going to learn in Nehemiah's day, when he physically rebuilt the city and the walls of Jerusalem from the shame and the debris thereof, was that he wanted to build and for his people, and we want to build for our people, for our wives, for our children, for our friends, for our neighbors, a life to build. Not only a life to build, a family to build. Do you remember when Life Action Ministries had that wonderful revival here 20 years ago? They said that you either need to build a godly heritage or you need to maintain a godly heritage. But God's plan for your family is a godly heritage. Some of you, that's very easy. That's how you were raised. I wasn't. My wife wasn't. We come from nominally Christian backgrounds, and it's very hard to generate a godly heritage when you don't know how to do it. You're going from first gear, trying to get it up high enough where you can slip it into second, and a lot of people are in fifth gear and 800 RPM, and they're just cruising, and you're jealous, and I'm jealous too. A life to build by these principles, a family to build by these principles, a business to build. If you have a business or you work for a business and that's the company or the people that put food on your plate, these principles will help build your business God's way, and also arising and building as a church family or as a fellowship. And you recall from last week when you're studying any kind of scripture references, you have three questions. What does it mean then? What did it mean now? And what does it mean personally? And that's the bridge by which you can go from these things were written aforetime for our admonition and instruction. We can take those lessons and bring them over. Nehemiah received a commission, we saw that last week, from the Lord to rebuild the walls of the city of God. Here's 6 principles today that move us from just thinking to doing and just planning to actually getting our hands dirty and doing something. Number 1, Nehemiah, as God's man and with the warrant of the king and the power of God and the direction of God behind him, fixed his focus. Look in verse 12. And I arose in the night. Things are kind of a diamond point at 3 a.m. There's not a lot of loose thinking going on at 3 in the morning. You're trying to figure out what God's saying to you and how to get back in bed if you can. And I arose in the night, I and some few men with me. Neither I told any man that my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any beast with me, save that the beast I rode on. This man had a mandate from God, and it's going to flow over into the life of the local church or your family or your job or your business or whatever you do when you're alone with God and can fast or weep or God show you what to do. James Dobson is not on the TV as much as he was in the 80s when our kids were little, but I've always admired him. And he fasted every Monday for his children. He had other fasts, and his doctor told him to quit. Don't do that without talking to a doctor. Hypoglycemia can put you in the ditch, so be careful. Have you done that? It doesn't have to be dramatic and riding camels out in the middle of the night around Jerusalem. You can just go downstairs into a quiet place early in the morning or late at night, and then you won't be perhaps neutral and drifting. Our purpose is to be focused and aimed based on the principles of the first 2 lessons, and the God that called you is the God that equipped you. Every dream he puts in your heart in the sense of a plan for your life, he is going to equip you for it. It's not a maybe. It wouldn't work because without him you can do nothing. That's the idea. God has a plan and a job for every one of us, and we need to get alone and fix our focus on that plan. I worry about things 4 or 5 steps ahead. I've done it all my life. That's wrong. Life is hard by the yard, by the inch, it's a cinch. You worry about today's problems, and God will give you today's strength. That's a lesson I taught my kids 30 years ago, and I should have been listening myself because I'm the one that gets way, way, way ahead of this. God's plan for your life, God's plan for my life, God's plan for Nehemiah and the people of God in his day, and for Pastor Mark and the people of God in our day. Fixing our mind on the concept of this one thing I do. Number 1, turning problems into possibilities, fixing his focus. You need to get thinking clearly and precisely before we're going to move out in any kind of action. Number 2, not only fixing his focus, but finding the facts. He goes on a tour of inspection. Every military movie I've ever watched, when the new officer comes in, he whips them all into shape, and they go through all sorts of inspections and the white glove test when anybody's cleaning your house. Look at Nehemiah 2:13 through 15. And I went out by night by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, into the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. Then I went on to the gate of the fountain and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. This is the state of the broken down walls. Then went I up by the night by the brook, and viewed the wall, and turned back and entered into the gate of the valley, and so returned. So he made a wide circle, checked everything. What he's doing is reconnoitering, and he's getting the facts and seeing how things aren't in a written report, but how they are in reality. What are the actual facts? Well, here's the actual facts. God's work was in ruins, absolute ruins. The walls of the city of Jerusalem, we learn, symbolize the salvation of God, the glory of God. They were fallen down, and that which should have been a boast in the mouth of the people of God was a reproach to them. Today, when you join a church, in a way I'm glad I wasn't raised in a traditional church like a mainstream church back in the 60s, because now they're gone. The walls of orthodoxy have crumbled, and a new generation of preachers, slick and smooth and denying the Bible and denying the Christ of the Bible, stand in the pulpits of the faithful generations of years gone by. I don't usually use names, but you already know this. Charles Stanley was a great preacher. I love Charles Stanley. His son Andy is a heretic. He has denied half the Bible. The Old Testament means nothing, and anything that doesn't go along with a modern liberal doctrine, he's against it. And it would break his father's heart to know what was going on if they don't know in heaven. I don't know if they do or not. But a lot of churches have no Bible truth. They're held up on the memory and the fumes of work done by people who believe the Bible before them. Somebody said this is called using the master's methods to spread the devil's message. God's people are asleep at the switch. That's the idea. Walls of decency are crumbling. You know that old saying that which used to slink down back alleys now struts down Main Street. And God's people, again, are a switch. We need to get our head out of the sands and discover the facts. We're not looking for fights, but no offense, no effect. It's just going to be a salty message. There's not anything you can do. We can do what Nehemiah did and make a survey and look and see for ourselves what's up. Number one, Nehemiah fixed his focus. And this is his plan and God's call for his nation and his people and his family at that time. Number two, he found the facts. He didn't just take things at face value. He went out and looked for himself. Things look completely different when you go out and look for yourself. Number three, he said, I'll do this all by myself, stand back. No, he didn't. He formed a fellowship. Things are always better when you divide the work up, and many hands make light work. Your grandmother told you that, and my grandmother told me that. Look at Nehemiah 2:17. Then said I unto them, ye see the distress that we're in, how the Jerusalem lieth waste, the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. You don't need to get mad at people who are sucked in by lies of the devil and the world. You need to just plant a standard here and just do what we can here. We don't have any more power, but we don't have any less than doing what we are called to do in our little town, in our little county, in our little corner of East Tennessee. You say, well, there's other bigger places. Well, I hope God, and I know God will send them people, but if we're not here, I'm not sure who would reach here. This is our place. This is our time. He got some people to help him. Did you see the words us and we? He didn't believe in a one-man ministry, one-man marching band. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 9 says, for we are laborers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry, ye are God's building. That's the idea. There's a plural there that's being knit together by the Spirit of God, and there's strength in numbers. It is more powerful to work together in unity for a spiritual work like this at any level. We can do more together than any of us can do alone. Somebody said one can chase 1,000, 2, 10,000. Think of the power and the spiritual and social dynamite if we work together. 2 witnesses are a great testimony, but this is more than that. Henry Ford, I don't know if he's a Christian or not, but he was a mastermind, an organization He said, coming together is a beginning, keeping together is a progress, thinking together is unity, working together is success. There's something about forming a fellowship. And you've already got them built into your lives, and I do too. Your spouse is your number one fellowship beyond your children, beyond anything else. In your life, in your family, as a business, as a corporation. A corporation is a corpus, a body that works together, many parts, one end. Not only fixing his focus and finding the facts, but Nehemiah formed a fellowship, and this is what we should do in our families. And then he fortified his faith. This will take all the air out of your sails. You need to have strength for this new or better way that you're going to be living and trying to reach your area and your family and your home for Christ. Look in verse 18. Then I told them of the hand of my God which was good upon me, as also the king's word that he had spoken unto me. And they said, let us arise and build, so strengthened their hands for this good work. That's an idea. We have to get God's permission and provision and protection. He rehearsed what God had called him to do before the nobles and the rulers and the people of the burnt walls of Jerusalem, and he was able to get their permission, and he showed them the king's note of provision. You remember that from last week? And the king's note of protection. People were going to come against him, and he had resources. They were from God. Humans fear the new. I don't like to change much. That's why we're out in this little town. That's exactly the smaller place you get, the more nobody's ever done it that way seems to have authority. But he gave us the permission and provision and protections. If God's leading and his good hand is upon us, then tomorrow is no longer a threat. And Nehemiah reviewed all that God had done for them, all that God had promised for them, all that the king, God's servant on earth, had promised to do at the bequest of Nehemiah, which was kind of a miracle. That's wonderful. Remember last week we talked about the king's heart as the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord as rivers of water. He turneth it whithersoever he will. That's what's going on here. Why was the hand of God on Nehemiah? When we remember the faithfulness of God yesterday, we have less fear and more confidence we can do things tomorrow. But why Nehemiah? Was this just random? No. The God of the universe works decently and in order and according to principle, and that's why God's hand of blessing may be upon a man or a church or a people. I used to be on the development board at Mid-America Seminary in Memphis, and Gray Allison was the preacher, and he was from New Orleans and born Cajun way out in the woods, and he was a wonderful preacher. I mean, whatever he said, I'd go forward because that was absolutely wonderful. But he talked about lots of stories about trying to do things by themselves, and he was about this tall. And every time he'd get close to God showing up in a problem or a work or a family or a home, he'd say, and the tears would come down his eye, he'd say, then God's man showed up. God's man showed up. And everybody knew what he was going to say, but that made the difference. That's how God did it. That's the idea. Learn here to this principle I'm going to give you why God's hand of blessing may be on a church or a work or a people. Don't turn to it, but just write it down if you want. Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these things saith he that is holy, he that is true, he that hath the key of David, he that openeth, and no man shutteth, and shutteth, and no man openeth. This is about the church of the open door. I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, no man can shut it. For thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my word, and not denied my name. Open and no one shuts, shuts and no one opens. Here's a quote. When he opens a door, that is God, there are not enough devils in hell to slam it shut. When he closes the door, there's not enough angels in heaven to kick it open. In your personal life, don't you see this? Our class has grown. We're not old, surely, but we're middle-aged where we weren't 30 years ago together. This is the idea. When you pray for God's will in your life, it just seems to me that it's more clear the older I get. I used to wait for liver quivers and shivers and wait for angels dancing around. And now I think, should I go left or should I go right? and they say, left's on the phone, the job's not available, they're broke and they can't help us, I'm pretty much taking that as a no. Just call me crazy. When a door shuts, it shuts, and almost always I start looking around because I think there's got to be a door that's going to open here. Something's going to give. And it does. That's the idea. God opens and shuts doors. And in your personal life, he opens and no man can shut, and shuts and no man can open. And you say, well, God's just moving them around on a whim. No, he's not moving them around on a whim. In verse 8 again, it says, God talking, I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, no man can shut it. For thou hast little strength, kept my word, has not denied my name. Did you see how the working principle was in there? God's not going to give strength to rebels. He's also not going to give all his resources to the indolent who won't use it. That's the idea. You do some work, he's going to give you more. God only opens doors for people who want to go through them. You and I don't know that, and don't judge other people, because we certainly are not in position to do that. But that may be what's going on lots of times when doors aren't open, and we don't know that. So we keep encouraging. This blessing was activated by the Spirit of God, because the Spirit of God is the one who can get into somebody's heart invisibly and start melting cold hearts and changing people's hearts. Not only is this blessing activated by the Spirit of God, it's saturated by the Word of God. Did you see in verse 7 and 8? Thou hast kept my word. He's describing people to whom he can open doors safely. Number 3, this was a Bible-preaching, Bible-believing church. You say, how do you know that? Because it says, has not denied my name. Whole denominations that were used of God mightily didn't have denied God's name and absolutely shut the door to God doing anything in that church. All sorts of movements and thoughts have been just completely reorganized in a wrong way by people who deny the name of God. These people in Revelation 7 and 8 in the Open Door Church love the Lord Jesus Christ, and that is the sort of church family business that God gives an open door. Question again, why did Nehemiah have the good hand of God upon him? Whatever it is, and we're studying here, you don't want God to open doors in your life or your ministry or your marriage, that would be crazy. Number next, not only fortified by his faith, but he faced the foe. Look in Nehemiah 2, 19 through 20. Whenever you try to do something, somebody's going to show up and try to rain on your parade. Guarantee it. No good work goes unpunished. Mark that down. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they said, oh, God's here, we better leave. No, they pulled out a very powerful tool. They laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, what is this thing that you do? Will you rebel against the king? Before we go on to the next one, we've talked about this before, but once the devil can get you to laugh at sin, it is almost impossible for you to treat it seriously after that. That's the tragedy of situation comedies. I love comedy. I like old comedy. My wife, I like old 1940s radio programs. I like Jack Benny, and I like Gracie and George Allen and all that. And they certainly didn't drag you down. They were just cheerfully telling silly jokes. But now our entire culture is flooded with the idea that the whole idea of a God in heaven who rules and reigns, that there's a final judge of all the earth to whom we all will appear, they think that's a joke. I tell you, it's not, and they'll find it out, but it'll be too late. And here, let me read that again. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, what is this thing that you do? Will you rebel against the king? We're going to call CNN or Fox News, get them over here and do a special on you because we think you're making an end run around the right thoughts. And you're playing fast and loose here, and we're going to expose you. I mean, it's on. It's battle. What is this thing you do? Will you rebel against the king? And I like how Nehemiah answered very calmly. Then answered I them and said unto them, the God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build, but you have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. That's the idea. He told them, mark it. When people say, and God tells them to arise and build, the devil's crowd will always arise to move to stop it. Someone here's capital letters. The door to the room of opportunity always swings on the hinges of opposition. That's exactly true. Curtis Hudson was the editor of the Sword of the Lord years ago. It's old-timey messages. They're real good. And he had a saying in one of his books, you can't build a New Testament church with spare change and spare time. That's the idea. You can't. There's no easy way, cheap way, lazy way to do the work of God. You say, I thought this was an open door. That doesn't mean that it's not any adversaries. I'm getting back into ancestry since I have more time now, and so I found out that the Baptist and the Methodists were teaching about the same thing 100 or 120 years ago, or I wouldn't be here. My grandmother was kind of she was not only the child in the family, but she became the leader, like the secondary mother of the family, and she stayed on the family farm and tried to get everybody an education and everybody shoes and everybody off. It was very poor back then. But anyway, I wondered how she met my grandfather, who was about 25 years older than her. And he was a railroad engineer. In the last 53 years, it was passenger service from Jackson to Memphis and Memphis and back. But how they met was at a Methodist Sunday school party. She was a Baptist. He was a Methodist. They got married, and they went to the Methodist church after that. And it never was a problem because all the Bible churches back then were Bible-believing churches. The liberal churches that we have today are not lifted up that way at all. If they hadn't gone to that picnic, I wouldn't be here. It's very important to me. Do you know the definition of a serious illness? Anything wrong with me. Anything serious. That's the idea. Okay, mark it. When God's people say, arise and build, the devil's crowd will always rise up to stop them. Open door is not a Sunday school picnic. That was the illustration I was trying to get to eventually. But a grim conflict. These three wicked opponents were devil-inspired, spoke of the devil himself in his opposition to God's work, and we're going to see a lot more about Tobiah and Sanballat and these wicked opposition to the work of God in the rest of this story. But the bottom line is, do you want to do something good, great, and noble? The devil's crowd, again, is going to rise up to stop it if they can. And the agents will be temptation, lying, by a tempter, and a liar, and a destroyer, and an evil one. Well, here's the challenge to you is don't be discouraged by opposition. You say, but I wish they'd worry about something else. No, you don't. You should be ashamed to be involved in a work that is so meaningless that the devil doesn't even care whether it goes on or stops. Your work here, especially at our church or in our families and important things like that, needs to be enough of Christ in it and needs to be enough of the Bible in it that the devil would be opposed to it. And it doesn't mean we welcome opposition, but it means we're not amazed when it happens. If you're doing, and I hope we are, God's work, it is worthy of the opposition of the devil. That is kind of a tip your hat. You're defined, you've heard this before, not only by your friends, but by your enemies. If you're such a Casper milquetoast that nobody cares what you say, and you could say something outrageous and nobody would blink, that's not good. That's not a compliment to you. If God be for us, who can be against us? Opposition is not fun, but it's the only way to escape. Well, the only way to escape criticism, let me say this, is to say nothing, do nothing, think nothing. And you know what they'd criticize you for saying nothing, do nothing, and think nothing. So you can either talk or not, you can open your mouth or not. Either way you're going to be opposed. You might as well go ahead and try to do something for God, which, thank goodness, we've been involved in this church for all these many years, and that's what we want to do here. The final one, I think, is fulfilled their function. And this is what we're going to see in chapter 3, moving on next week, the story of how they began to build. In the Old Testament, things were physical illustrations. They were the field, the crops. They were fertility. They were outward things. And then when you move into the New Testament, God's blessing is more on the inside. Man looks on the outward appearance. God looks on the heart. That's the idea. They rose up in that day. We're talking about fulfilling their function. They'd done all their planning. They'd encouraged each other. They They got mark letters from the king about money and about their right to go ahead and to rebuild Jerusalem. And they said, okay, let's go. They rose up. They built the sheep gate. They sanctified it. They put up the gates and set the doors and set the locks and set the bars. And this is concrete and steel and godliness and shoe leather. And this is just specific. Adrian Rogers always said that the person that was leading silent prayer in the nursery department is going to be just as much judged of God for their work of the ministry as the best pastor message we could ever have. That's the idea. The pattern. Each one of them found an organized spot with a leader, a plan, a people willing to follow, and each person had part of the work. If you can break things down into manageable tasks at your work or your home or with your grandkids or in a church, everybody works. It's much less stress on each person. Things are done well because they're done frequently over and over, and you get better and better at it. Every time we put together furniture, which I'll work an extra 3 days not to have to put together furniture. I'm not a proud person, but I'm just about sick of putting those things together. You can't do it. But after about 3 hours, you can build it in about 30 seconds because you got it. I had a patient one time that was a carpenter, and he built some of the steakhouses. It might have been Sizzling Sirloin. It's one that's not around now. He said, Doc, we could build those things in a day and a half with our eyes closed. After a while, he went all over the country building them. Well, that's the idea here. They were finding organized spots with a leader, with a plan, with spiritual leadership, and a people willing to follow. Each had a work to do, and each mastered that work. Here's a good quote. No man can do everything, but each man can do something, and should do by the grace of God, because we have not equal gifts and equal tasks, but equal sacrifice. That's the pattern. Number 2 is the people. We're going to see in the next few weeks the different people that were involved in maintaining a city. Well, Augustine wrote the city of God. The kingdom of God is like that. We all have our roles. The New Testament talks about our gifts that God gave unto men when he ascended. Apothecaries. There's my wife. She's a retired pharmacist. They're biblical, so you can safely go there. Goldsmiths. Some old, some young, some women, some men, some from out of town. Look in chapter 3, verse 2. And next unto him builded the men of Jericho. Some people had come and they wanted to work. Well, he that is not against us is with us. Let's let him do it here. They won't get everybody. Verse 5 says, and next unto them the Techonites repaired, but their nobles put not their necks to the work of the Lord. Some people aren't going to do much of anything. Some will lean back and sniff. But don't let it be said of you in the days of opportunity that you just folded up. We don't want to fold up. Pattern, people, and places. Each one building right near his own house to start out. The best religion is home religion. And I'll tell you that because I have no religious background. I was raised in a completely agnostic home. And what impressed me was the reality of it. Friends and I would go over to their house, or their parents or their friends would have a big cookout or something, and I thought, this is real. This is not just something that they were putting on at that meeting they drug me to. I was more impressed by the fellowship of the home and the genuineness of that than I was just by any organized system. All this begins with an individual, then a couple, then a family, and those circles like rings in a pond make natural expansion outward. First, the things that we studied these first 2 lessons, my heart right with God, make me at least faithful, send revival, begin that revival, at least with me, open it in somebody else, it's God's work. What if each and every were really in their place, ready to serve, happy to work, every gear in sync, every combustion firing on every cylinder? Can you imagine what would happen? Look in chapter 2 and verse 20. Then answered I unto them and said unto them, the God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we his servants will arise and build, but ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. Those people were not interested in building the walls. Mark it, he said, the God of heaven, he will prosper us, and he will. But rejecting this, you'll have no portion, no right, no memorial in Jerusalem. What will be your memorial? None if you don't know the Lord Jesus. You can't be neutral. The God who's saved you, has equipped you, I know he has, and deployed you into his service, and you can start that today. Well, I've already looked at next week's. It's very good. It's going through this, and again, this whole picture is a great illustration. It's a historical fact. This is historical truth, but it is a great illustration that it can be a template for applying us and our marriages and our homes and our Sunday schools and things like that. Now, I don't normally do advertisements, but I'm going to give you an advertisement because Mark is going to be gone a couple of times the next few weeks, and he asked me to get the video series that we did before in 2018 on Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses ready for Sunday night the 14th and Sunday night the 21st. Then they're very good. It's a new one on the Jehovah's Witnesses. It was a series they had at the Ark Encounter up there in Kentucky, and a pastor named Ron Rhodes, who is in a ministry called Reasoning from the Scriptures. And the thing I like about him is he knows his Bible inside and out, but he's a walking, talking heart for God. He loves those Jehovah's Witness people very much because they've been led astray. And his whole attitude is just very, very good. We'll do Mormons first on the 14th. And remember, this video was put out when the Baptist Association was out there in Utah in 2012, I think. But it's just getting to know Mormons, what they believe, and how you can reach them. Sometimes we think, well, Jehovah's Witnesses sometimes get angry, and the Mormons are always real cheerful, but their doctrine's real funny. We'll try to unthread all that. We won't have time to do a lot of teaching afterwards because the videos are about 45 to 60 minutes. But anyway, remember that we're going to have a good series there, a mini-series on non-biblical religions, and then we're going to keep plowing ahead with Nehemiah. Lord, thank you for today, and thank you for these illustrations and this familiar story that we could apply it specifically to our life. Help us learn what you want us to learn the next few weeks, and to just keep opening the Scriptures every day to us. And help us do it for your identification and that we're your people. Amen.